Well, I did. I mean, age 19, I felt that I found the medium that I wanted to work in, and it was there was something very nice about knowing so clearly what I wanted to do and probably spend the rest of my life doing. I mean, it doesn't mean there aren't doubts and anxieties all along the way, but I have always been really clear about that. And I think there was something about being very shy as a child and not being able to express myself easily and having a lot of thoughts in my head, and that cinema seemed a way of sort of transferring this sort of mess that seemed to be in my head onto something, onto a screen, and it could encompass so many aspects of life.
Hello?
Do you still love me?
Yes, a lot, I think, and I've been thinking about that more recently because the last two films, which are short films, I shot myself, and I realized what a great pleasure I have in being behind the camera and framing myself, and how comfortable I feel behind a camera. And when you're directing, when you're working with the cinematographer, it's not quite the same thing, because I'm directing them and they're behind the camera, or the operator's behind the camera. I'm not, but actually to be right there myself is an exciting thing. And it doesn't mean that I won't work with the cinematographer again, but I've found a lot of pleasure in doing this myself on smaller projects.
Hi.
I love you.
Well, it was a much more practical, literal thing of him helping me because I was an admirer of his films before I ever met him. And then I would see him in a cafe in London multiple times. I'd see him sometimes sitting with other people, sometimes sitting on his own. And I'm a very shy person, but I decided to go up to him one day and say, you know, that I love his films. And actually my aim in going up to him was to ask if I could work on his next film. And the film that he was planning then was Caravaggio. But in fact, it was a number of years before he ended up making it. But anyway, I asked if I could work on Caravaggio, and he said, well, you know, what are you doing? What's your work? What are your interests? And he encouraged me to go and visit him with my work, which wasn't film work because I hadn't made a film at that point. But I had taken photographs and I'd done sketches, paintings that I then took. I took a portfolio of my work to him, and then from that point he was encouraging me to make Super 8 film. And pick up a film camera, and in fact at that point that I went to see him, I'd had a commission by an artist to make a film, you know, not having made a film before, so I was asking his advice about that, and he was encouraging me.
I have no idea what I'm doing. Am I doing the right thing? I have no idea. I'm going away to Africa for 11 months. Why? Who knows?
This isn't done properly. It's already pink.
Really?
Would you like me to get you a new one, or would you...
Can I have a word with the chef? Because that's actually quite dangerous.
Yes, well, I mean, it's true. I suppose I was forming my ideas in the negative in a way. So the frustrations I had when I was making television, where it was required to always be moving the camera, to be shooting a lot of close-ups, a lot of medium shots, which I found not so interesting. I didn't find that a good way of seeing a character or understanding a person, because I'm really interested in gesture and bodies and movement. And so in these restrictions that I was given, I kept thinking in the back of my head, well, when I make my own work, I'm going to do it in a different way, at a different pace. And so yes, that formed my way of making Unrelated. It was also because all through the time that I was making television, I was going to the cinema and absorbing films and attracted to particular filmmakers that I liked, that included, of course, Derek Jarman, but also a lot of European cinema and American cinema. It was, much more about what I wasn't allowed to do in television. You know, I couldn't hold the shot for a length of time because, you know, you're constantly pressurized to keep the audience interested, or this idea that the audience are only going to be interested if something's very fast moving and if the camera's moving all the time.
Well, guinea fowl is actually served slightly pink, slightly underdone. It's not like chicken.
I wasn't told that when I ordered it, though, was
Okay.
it?
Yes, I mean, again, maybe some of these ideas were formed when I was making television, because you always had to have a finished screenplay before making an episode of a series, or, you know, it was very precise, the communication between the screenplay and then what you were shooting in front of you. So there was not much room for any kind of improvisation or changes from the written word to the screen. And I realized when I started making Unrelated that I was really interested in just what I saw in front of me, and it was much more interesting than what I'd written, because I had written a conventional story for that film. But it was, I mean, I think after literally 2 or 3 days, I was ignoring what I'd written and encouraging the actors to play with the words and put things in their own words, and, you know, shooting more like a documentary in a way. And that, I wouldn't have known that, until being in that situation. And I just learnt a lot about how I like to work and what interests me about cinema. And what interests me above everything is the actual shooting of the film, and then what happens and how one interacts with the performers and how the crew work, and just the dynamics of a shoot are so interesting to me, inspiring to me. Well, I suppose how the process worked is that after making Unrelated, I realized that I didn't want to write the same style of screenplay again. And as I was forming Archipelago, the second film, I made the decision, or maybe it just came unconsciously, to write, to describe the interior life of the characters, but also the place and the story. So, writing much more like a short story, as you say. With some dialogue like you would have in a novel. And then actually, maybe connected to my photographic background, what's really important to me is these documents are illustrated. So they're illustrated with photographs. And in the case of Archipelago, it was photographs that I took of the island where I was going to shoot. So the taking of the photograph helps me form the story, I think, in a way. So so it's already not like a storyboard, but it's some kind of beginnings of a storyboard, and then the story I'm explaining quite, you know, on different levels. So not everything I'm describing you'll end up seeing in the film, but when I give the story to people working on the film, they have an understanding of the psychology they have a sort of internal and external map of what I want to do. But most of all, the space to create when we're shooting, because there's a lot of things that I don't know until we get to that point.
Mum, we're here. We'd like to check in, please.
My mother has a relationship with this house. She was here when she was young.
So much of that is unexplainable in a way, because it's just how we are together when we're working, and I find I forget exactly how things have come together. But for me, the casting and the deciding of who's going to be in front of the camera on a particular project is one of the most important things. It's also one of the aspects I get the most pleasure from. And I will sometimes cast somebody that I don't know beforehand, and they might be an actor or not an actor at all. And occasionally I'll choose an actor who is very willing to be in this more improvisational landscape, this way of working. But then when we get to that point, I realised, or we realised together, that it's quite challenging to free yourself up in that way, particularly if you're a trained actor. So it's not all, I don't always know how it's going to be until we get to the filming, but it's always an interesting challenge anyway.
Are we the only people staying here? I don't know.
I mean, we're talking a lot, but also we have a really deep understanding of each other, and that makes it a really interesting collaboration. And with The Eternal Daughter, particularly where Tilda's playing two parts, it was a process. I think a lot of was unspoken, actually, understanding each other and knowing each other's mothers and knowing this territory of mothers and daughters, even if Julie is not Tilda, but there was a lot that she was bringing to both those parts, in fact. But together it was a dance together. It was a very intimate, probably out of all the films, that relationship with Tilda during the filming of The Eternal Daughter was the sort of most, well, it was just there was some symbiosis of ideas and thoughts, and we were able to. We didn't rehearse anything; it all went into the film.
Prompted memories.
That's what rooms do. They hold these stories.
Some of them are uncomfortable.
We're here now. And that was then. I'm not sure I feel I have a right to do such a thing. It feels like trespassing. Happy birthday, Mum. To us.
I think I don't feel about it or think about it at all, in a way, because I've gone through the process of producing the work at the writing stage, and it comes so naturally to me to put myself into the story in some way. Well, it's not even putting myself into it, but putting my ideas and my thoughts and observations into what I do. So I can't sort of separate that from who I am. It's what I think the challenge for me would be to do something where I'm not putting myself into the story. But I'm sure I would find a way of, getting myself in there somewhere. But I can't. Yeah, it's hard to answer because it's such a natural thing for me.
You're very special, Julie.
I don't think I am.
Oh no, you don't think you are.
Very normal, really.
You're not normal at all.
The two souvenirs were very challenging to make because it involved me looking back on a period of my life that wasn't altogether happy. And so it was probably the most emotionally challenge of the films, particularly the first part of The Souvenir. But at the same time as being maybe the most challenging, and you could say maybe difficult at times, it was also the most pleasurable because I loved working in a studio and building the apartment that I lived in London within a studio and all the different iterations that are within The Souvenir. So the difficulty can also come with the most pleasure too. Most satisfaction.
Presumably there's a film expert.
No, a whole team of students.
And no one's giving you direction?
No.
Sounds fairly typical for an art school.
It was very pleasurable to make both those pieces of work, not just because they're short in length, but they were concentrated periods of time. I mean, a feature film can take 2 or 3 years, but both these pieces of work were done very quickly, but with a lot of energy, and I put a lot of myself into them. And the handbag film, although you could say that's nothing to do with my personal life, actually I put a lot of myself into that. So there are ways that I can do that doesn't seem like some kind of autobiography. But yes, with both pieces of work, they're leading to something else, but I'm still working out what that is. But like I say, back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the being behind the camera myself and doing the framing and making those decisions on my own, I found very exciting. But also using a technology that was, I could just pick up and take around with me. Well, I did. I mean, age 19, I felt that I found the medium that I wanted to work in. There was something very nice about knowing so clearly what I wanted to do and probably spend the rest of my life doing. I mean, it doesn't mean there aren't doubts and anxieties all along the way, but I have always been really clear about that. And I think there was something about being very shy as a child and not being able to express myself easily and having a lot of thoughts in my head, and that cinema seemed a way of sort of transferring this sort of mess that seemed to be in my head onto something, onto a screen, and it could encompass so many aspects of life.